Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Jools Kasmire from the UK Data Service Computational Social Science Training Team based in Manchester. Today I'm going to talk to you about the UK Data Service and how it can contribute to an exploration of educational outcomes. I'm going to start by giving a quick summary of what the UKDS is. Then I'm going to give an overview of the data we hold, and finally I'll show you how to get started finding and accessing our data. The UKDS is a comprehensive resource funded by the Economic and Social Research Council, one of many funded by UK Research and Innovation. As such, we provide access to the largest collection of social, economic and population data in the UK. Data providers deposit their data with us, and then we make this available to users. As well as providing access to all of the data, the UK Data Service provides support, training and guidance to help researchers find, access and use this data. So who's it for? Well, we like to say it's for everyone. This includes, but is not limited to, academic researchers and students, government analysts, charities and voluntary sector foundations, business consultants, independent research centres, think tanks, and many more options. And our data comes from many different sources. A lot of official agencies, mainly the central government, international statistical time series, research institutions, individual academics who make their research available as part of their research grants, market research agencies, public records and historical sources, lots of things. And we hold all different types of data. Mostly survey data, both cross-sectional and longitudinal. We also hold aggregate data, international macro data, census data, and qualitative and mixed methods data, as well as a few things that don't fit in any of these categories very well. So now, I'll just quickly cover how you can find and access all of these different sources of data from the UK Data Service. If you don't know how to get started, you can click on the Find Data tab at the top, which directs you to a few common options as well as to some links to tutorials and to learn more. One of the most popular options is our catalog search tool. The catalog search tool allows you to search the datasets available from the UK Data Service. You can enter relevant search terms, search for particular datasets by name or study number. You can also use the filters down the left-hand side to further refine your search. But maybe you also want to browse data. This is available as well, with theme being the first browsing option presented to you. One of the top themes is education. There are more themes if you scroll down, but if you keep scrolling down, you'll also find you can browse by data type. Keep scrolling down even more to browse by teaching data sets, as well as a few other categories that we have grouped together under general. You can also search for particular variables within data sets in our variable and question bank. For example, if we were to type in education, we could see which data sets contain variables on this topic. Just a note on the variable and question bank though, this doesn't contain all of the data sets we currently hold, so it's worth searching the catalogue for later versions of data sets that you find through the variable and question bank to double check. The options on the left-hand side here, you can expand with these little plus signs. These are specific to the variable and question bank. Of course, you could also choose to search instead in the quali bank. This is especially useful if you're interested in qualitative data, as it allows you to search key terms within different data types of qualitative resources. Note that here too, the options and menus on the left are unique to the quali bank. Finally, we have the HACCET thesaurus. HACCET stands for Humanities and Social Science Electronic Thesaurus, for those to whom that may not be obvious. This search tool contains key social science terms and related concepts. For example, here, conservatories is categorized under educational institutions, which is under educational institutions, which is under educational systems and institutions, which is under education. This nesting structure is clear when you look at the tool via the Hierarchy tab. Alternatively, you can look at the thesaurus through the Alphabetical tab, which is pretty self-explanatory. The thesaurus is a helpful way to show you what other terms might be useful to search in the catalogue, either because they fall higher or low in the hierarchy, or because they are listed under the entry terms and related concepts within an article. Just a quick point here on different data access levels. Starting at the most restricted types, we have controlled data, which is also called secure access data. This data can only be accessed through a safe room, secure lab within the UK, or the SafePod network. Next, we have safeguarded data, which is available through end-user license. Access to this kind of data requires registration. Some of this data is also special license data, which has additional requirements. There's also reshared data, which is self-deposited by data creators or owners. Access to and controls on this kind of data can vary. Finally, the least restricted type is open data. This is data that can be accessed by anyone, even without the need to register. Importantly, most of the data in our collections can be accessed free of charge. You can simply register using your institutional login. If you don't have an institutional login, you can apply to get a UK Data Archive username. Thanks everyone for listening, and let me know if you have any questions.
I'm Francesca Borgonovi, and I lead the skills analysis team in the UCD Centre for Skills, and I'm also an honorary professor at University College London in the Social Research Institute. I will talk about gender gaps in education through the lens of international scale assessments. And so the way in which I will structure my talk is provide first an overview of international large-scale assessments, what they are, and some of the different assessments that are available. Then I will detail one of the most important assessments that the OECD leads on, the Programme for International Student Assessment. And then I will provide you with some examples of my own research on and detail how international large-scale assessments can be used to examine gender gaps in education. Now, international large-scale assessments in education are system-level instruments, so they're not assessments designed to give information about the achievement of individual students, but are rather designed to allow the measurement and allow comparisons at the system level, and how well different systems are equipping young people with knowledge and ability. They're typically low stakes, so there are no consequences for individual test takers. They include actual assessments, so tests, as well as questionnaires that are used to have an understanding of test takers, who they are, socioeconomic background, etc. They're called large scale because they involve large representative samples from many different countries in different continents. They're typically repeated cross-sections to allow for monitoring over time, as well as comparisons between countries. And they mostly focus on school-age populations, although in particular the OECD has led efforts on assessments of adults. Now, one important difference between different assessments is what they intend to measure. So before starting analyzing data, it's important to have a look at the assessment frameworks of different assessments. The different assessments, I think, can be in a sense divided between those that have an emphasis on the curricular content and coverage. And so the test questions are developed in a way that reflects curricular content, whether that's in mathematics or science, for example. And a different set of assessments, on the other hand, emphasize problem-solving abilities and transversal skills. And because of this different focus, the target population of the two types of assessments is quite different. The assessments that focus on curricular content are grade-based because you want to see if by a certain grade, young people have mastered the material that is part of a particular curriculum, for example, whereas problem-based assessments are mostly age-based. Now, the OECD and the IEA are the two institutions that are responsible for the majority of international large-scale assessments that are across continents. There are also a number of initiatives that are regional in nature, but I would not cover them in my presentation. The OECD is responsible for the Program for International Assessment, Student Assessment, PISA. The areas covered are reading, math, and science. These are the core domains, as well as innovative domains, and the focus is 15-year-old students. PIAC, the survey of adult skills, focuses on literacy, numeracy, problem solving, and the focus is the population of 16 to 65-year-olds. So it goes to older age groups, but also focuses on young people who are not in school anymore. The International Early Learning and Child Wellbeing Study focuses on social emotional skills, and it covers 5-year-olds. And the study of social emotional skills covers social emotional skills, and it focuses on 15-year-old students, although there's an option for 10-year-olds. The IEA studies teams, the Trends in International Mathematics and Science study, focuses on mathematics and science. It has a grade-based target population of 4th and 8th graders, although there is the possibility for countries to also adopt an assessment of the last year of their secondary school. PEARLS focuses on reading literacy among 4th graders. ICCS is about civic and citizenship competencies, and again, it's targeted at 8th graders. And ICILS focuses on digital competences, and it focuses on 8th grade students. Now, the international large-scale assessments have been used in international benchmarking and global monitoring initiatives, such as the Sustainable Development Goals. In particular, SDG 4 on quality education focuses on this aspect of quality. So the evolution, it's not the only one, but an important evolution from the Millennium Development Goals is to not only monitor participation in education, but also the outcomes of education, whether young people who are taking part in education are developing skills, are learning something. And so in this context, international large-scale assessments have played an important role to monitor trends over time for the same country, but also to monitor disparities in education provision for different groups. Now, because different studies focus on specific world regions, not every country takes part in every single study. There have been attempts to link across studies to provide a global mapping of learning outcomes and human capital using linkages across the different studies. And here is an example of an initiative that has tried to do that. Now, moving to the Program for International Student Assessment, PISA. This is a low-stakes assessment. It's designed to take around 2 hours to complete, so it's a timed assessment, and the test is followed by a questionnaire. It's delivered, the aim is to provide system-level monitoring, so there are no grades or estimates for individual students. The target population is 15-year-olds. In fact, it's students between the age of 15 and 3 months and 16 years and 2 months at the time of the assessment window, and who attend at least lower secondary school, and it's problem-based. It has been implemented every 3 years since 2000, although the 2021 edition was postponed because of COVID. And it has been implemented in the latest edition by over 80 countries and economies worldwide. The core assessment domains, and every cycle has a different core domain, are science, mathematics, and reading, and the 2022 assessment focused as a main domain on mathematics, as well as innovative domains. There have been assessments of problem solving, collaborative problem solving, financial literacy, global competence, and creativity. The sample size is a minimum of 4,500 students per country, attending at least 150 schools. There is flexibility. Countries are allowed to do oversampling or regional sampling or adding grade-based components for their own purposes. And the study is conducted in the language of instruction. And this has important consequences for monitoring the skills and abilities of particularly very recent migrants in a country. The study was conducted using paper instruments, paper and pencil instruments until 2012, while it has been administered using computers since 2015. And this has an influence on the test design and the metrics sampling that the metrics design that is used in the assessment. Allowing for a more complex design, but also on the items themselves, because with computers it is possible to design scenarios or interactive items, and it is possible to adopt an adaptive element to the test. On top of the test, there are rich background questionnaires that are administered to students, as well as school principals and parents. And there's also the possibility for countries to implement ad hoc student questionnaires, for example, on ICT or educational careers, as well as additional assessment instruments. Now, here is a link to the PISA databases and analysis tools that are available on the OECD website. You can search for the different years, and there is the possibility to do to explore the data interactively on the PISA main page. All the questionnaires, as well as national versions, are available on the PISA website, as well as the codebook and figures and tables produced by the OECD in the international reports. And finally, it is possible to download all the databases, either in SAS or SPSS. What you can also find are the codes that were used to compute the main indicators that are used by the OECD. And importantly, because indices for to describe the economic, social, and cultural status of students need to be comparable over time, as well as across countries. You can see the time trend data here in case you're interested in doing that. Now, in terms of some of the analysis, I wanted to show you some results of work that I've done, moving away from gender gaps singular to gender gaps plural, and how these vary depending on what, when, and where gender gaps are assessed. So in terms of what, even if we do not look at different assessments and we focus just on PISA, things look quite different depending on the assessment domain that is considered. Now, the PISA scales are standardized to have a mean of 500 and a standard deviation of 100 in the base year. And a difference, a gender gap in favor of boys, for example, in mathematics, of 9 points is roughly equivalent to 9% of the standard deviation. In terms of reading, the gender gap is in favor of girls, and it's much larger, 24 points. And in collaborative problem solving in 2015, this was 29 points. Now, Gender gaps vary depending on the performance distribution. So what you can see is that the gender gap in mathematics is much larger at the 90th percentile. It's 22 score points on average. And the gender gap in reading in favor of girls is, on the other hand, much larger at the bottom of the performance distribution, where it's 34 points. In terms of when, one way in which we can consider temporal dimensions is the age at which assessments occur. So when comparing the gender gap in literacy and numeracy on synthetic cohorts that took part in different large-scale assessments at different ages, so age around 9-10 for Teams Pearls, age 15-16 for PISA, and then age 26-27 for the OECD survey of adult skills. What we do notice is that the gender gap differs among different at different age groups for the same cohort, and whereas for literacy, it takes a kind of inverted U shape. For numeracy, it grows over time in favor of men. And if you want to see what happens when you look at the evolution of numeracy gender gaps across the distribution, this is much grows larger, particularly at the 90th percentile. Another way to consider the when question is to consider the test, the PISA test, as being a long test. And it is possible to see how the performance of girls and boys changes over time in this 2-hour test. So here what you can see is the gender difference in the decline in the percentage, in the proportion of correct answers that boys and girls provide in the reading test in PISA 2009. And what you can see is that there is quite a bit of difference across countries, but in general, the performance drop is higher for boys than it is for girls. And this is important because in another study in which we were able to look at longitudinal follow-ups of cohorts that took part in PISA in 2000 and 2003 in Australia, Denmark, and Switzerland. What we saw is that on top of controlling for performance decline predicted the likelihood that young people would complete university. Now, in terms of where, one interesting fact is that the gender gap in reading is extremely wide when young people are tested in the context of PISA, but it's much smaller when young people are tested in the survey of adult skills. Now, here is results from a study that I did comparing the gender gap in literacy in PISA and PIAAC in 2012. So it's the same cohort. I only focused on young respondents in PIAAC. And what you see is that the gender gap is very much present and large in PISA, but it's much smaller in PIAAC. And even, you know, when you try to standardize the tests for different factors, you cannot reconcile the two differences. Now, an important difference between PISA and PIAAC is that PISA is implemented in the context of schools, while PIAAC is implemented in people's houses. And there is a possibility that the setting may matter for gender gaps, and that in particular boys may perform and be motivated to a different extent when they take assessments in a school setting and we take assessments in a household setting. And finally, I think I wanted to just bring about a couple of issues related to new measurement possibilities that come from the fact that the assessments are now conducted on computers. In particular, the OECD-led assessments allow to analyze process data. Log files are files that contain traces of communications between the test taker and the computer interface, and they are being increasingly used because of methodological interest and substantive interest in terms of how long it takes to individuals to solve different questions, whether the problem-solving process follows some logic or not. Now, at the moment, a lot of the test items haven't been specifically developed using a theoretical model of human cognition, and so they are opportunistic. The way in which information on the test taking process is not necessarily responding to some ex ante willingness to develop indicators. There are some exceptions, in particular the PISA 2012 problem-solving assessment, for which there were strategies designed to see if students try to vary one thing at a time to provide answers. And I think log files are valuable. They enrich the set of information that can be collected in a cheap and scalable way. And they enable to observe, and I would say, quote unquote, test takers' behaviors. At the same time, it's important that not everything that we would like to observe is actually recorded. And the interpretation of log files is inherently item specific, and this poses some challenges, because in order to interpret the information, it's impossible. Well, interpreting information is impossible without accessing the full item description and what happens in the files. And just to give you an example of the fact that log files do not necessarily provide all the information about what people are doing, here's information from a study in which we looked at and matched the information from the log file with information from what people were doing using glasses that recorded information from test takers' behaviors. And so a long delay, let's say in a log, when somebody is trying to respond to a test question, could signal the fact that the person is disengaging, but it could also signal that they're using tools outside of the computer platform to solve the item. For example, they may be using their hands, or they may be using an external calculator. And in this case, it's difficult to interpret timing information as providing information on engagement motivation, or rather, for example, what people are doing outside of the computer platform. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I will close. Thank you.
My name's Claire Crawford. I'm an Associate Professor of Economics at the UCL Centre for Education Policy and Equalising Opportunities. And I'm here to talk to you today about some work that we've been doing using the Longitudinal Education Outcomes data, on which I'm leading a grant in partnership with the Department for Education to support the development and enhancement of that data. So just to give you a bit of background to our project, we know that there's a vast literature highlighting really substantial gaps in education outcomes between individuals from different socioeconomic backgrounds, a slightly more limited literature on labour market gaps. But in many cases in these pieces of analysis, the groups of interest are quite coarse, especially when they are determined using administrative data. So, for example, in a UK context, we have an indicator of low family income, which suggests whether a student is eligible for free school meals or not. In that case, the group is just split into two, one who is eligible, one who is not. And there's obviously potential for substantial variation in outcomes within those two relatively large groups. So now we have new administrative data, which means we can actually track individuals throughout their education careers and actually now into the labour market. That means we can capture eligibility for free school meals at a variety of different points in time throughout an individual's school career, and that allows us to get a slightly richer measure of socioeconomic background for those individuals. So what we're doing in this study is exploring how education and early labour market trajectories vary for those who are eligible for free school meals for a different number of years. And we're doing that using some relatively recent administrative data that has been created in England called the Longitudinal Education Outcomes, or LEO data. So for those who are not aware of this data, it essentially combines education and labour market records for anyone who's interacted with either the school or further education system in England since 2001-2. So that's mostly going to be individuals who've been through the school system since then, born since 1985-86. So on the education side, it pulls together records from the school system, from a database called the National Pupil Database. That contains a census of all individuals attending state schools in England, and that's where we derive our measure of free school meal eligibility from. And it also includes a variety of measures of attainment, which are taken by students across the schooling system. That's linked to further education records from what's called the individualised learner records, and also higher education records as well. And more recently, we have added to the data university applications information. So not just where someone ends up at university, but also where they applied. So combined with all of these education records, we have tax and benefit records. So on the tax side, we have information on both employees and the self-employed from the different tax systems that collect that information. For employees, we observe different employment spells when they were working for different companies, and as well as how much they earn in any given tax year. We've also recently added to the data information on the industry in which the individual's firm is based. But one downside of this data is that we don't have access to information on hours of work. So that's obviously going to be an important limitation when we're thinking about how much someone is earning. We can combine that with self-assessment data. That means information from individuals who are not employees but might be self-employed. So we have a measure of annual income or profits for those individuals. And then on top of that, we can supplement information on out-of-work benefit spells. So we know when those claims started and finished, as well as the type of benefit that individuals were claiming. We have both of those sets of records across pretty much the whole stretch of the data to which we have access. So in our study, we're going to be focusing on one particular cohort, which is those who took their GCSEs, the national qualifications taken by most students at the age of 16 in 2011-12. And we chose that because it gives us a good stretch of information both beforehand and afterwards. So in terms of backward-looking information, we're able to track an individual's eligibility for free school meals pretty much all the way through their schooling, from primary through to secondary, so from years 1 to 11. But then we can also follow them forward into the labour market up to around age 23, which brings us up to the 2018-19 tax year, i.e. before the pandemic. So in the analysis I'm going to present to you today, we focus on individuals with a complete free school meal history. So that means we just focus on individuals in the state sector. We don't capture individuals who might have exited the system in order to take up a place in a private school for any period of time, for example. And that gives us around 450,000 individuals in total. So what we then do is split the sample according to the number of years of free school meal eligibility. Of course, there are still going to be individuals who were never eligible at any point during their school career. And what we do for those individuals is to use information on the neighbourhoods in which they live, very local neighbourhoods. And we kind of draw together information about the characteristics of the populations who live in those neighbourhoods in terms of different measures of socioeconomic status, in order to provide a proxy for their own individual measures. So for those individuals, we split them into 4 groups, quartiles, on the basis of how advantaged or disadvantaged their very local neighbourhood is. So just to give you a flavour of the variability that we have in the data, this table is showing you the number of years for which an individual is eligible for free school meals, split according to primary school in the rows and secondary school in the columns. So you can see here through this figure that I've highlighted in red that around 70% of individuals in our sample were never eligible for free school meals at all during their school career. And we can contrast that with around 5% of individuals who were eligible throughout their school career, or almost throughout almost the entirety of their school career. But you can see that there's a mixture of individuals spread across the remaining cells of the table as well. So there's quite a lot of movement in and out of the system. And you can see here that for individuals who were eligible for just 1 or 2 years in primary school, about 5% are in that group and then were not eligible at all during secondary school. By contrast, if you focus just on individuals who have a similar number of years of entitlement but in secondary rather than primary school, you can see that figure's a bit lower. And that's typical throughout the cells in the table. People are more likely to be eligible for free school meals in primary rather than secondary school. And in future work, we're going to explore how much that might matter for later outcomes. What I'm going to be talking to you about here today is individual trajectories. So what we're really interested in doing is characterising how individuals are moving through post-compulsory education and into the labour market. And the way in which we do that is to classify the activities that individuals are undertaking in each 6-monthly period between about the ages of 17 and 23. And the way in which we classify those is first in understanding whether they're undertaking any educational qualifications during those periods. And we can classify individuals separately according to both the level of education and the type of education. So whether it's below level 2, 2, 3 or 4, and for level 2 and 3 we can split that into academic and vocational education. So for those who are less familiar with the English system, level 2 is roughly equivalent to a kind of set of GCSE passes, and level 3 is roughly equivalent to a kind of set of A-level passes, and then level 4 or above is higher education. And a really nice feature of the LEO data is that we're also able to look not only whether people are in education at a given point in time, but also whether they're simultaneously in work. So for each of those types of education, we can classify people according to whether they are or are not also working in the same 6-monthly period. And then we've additionally got a set of other states which are just being in work, just being on out of work benefits and not being observed in our data. And in total, that gives us about 15 states, which we're measuring across each of 14 periods. So we'll be classifying trajectories across using that information. And then finally, I'll just talk briefly at the end of the presentation about some results we've got using daily earnings. So I mentioned earlier that we had access to annual earnings and employment spells, but not hours. But obviously using that information, we can also calculate a measure of daily earnings. And so we've made use of that in some of our analysis. Okay, so diving straight into some results, I'm going to show you 4 of these types of pictures. So what we're doing here is for each 6-monthly period between 17 and 23, we're summarising the proportion of the cohort who are in each of those 15 states that I mentioned. So, and we're doing that separately here and I will show you another slide which does a similar thing for different groups, but here I'm focusing on those who are in the no free school meal eligible part of the population, the lowest quartile of that group on the left-hand side, the highest quartile of that group on the right-hand side. So you can think of this as the most and least disadvantaged amongst that group of individuals. So in each case, we've grouped activities in different colours. So the different shades of each colour are telling you, in terms of the education outcomes, whether someone is working or not working at the same time. So if we take the right-hand figure to start with, we can see that this is really a traditional route through an academic set of qualifications. So the kind of sizable brownish figures in the middle on the left-hand side are people who are taking academic level 3 ed qualifications, mostly A-levels. And in each case, the darker colours are showing people who are just doing that qualification. The lighter shading is showing those who are doing that qualification but also working alongside it. So most individuals in this group are following that track for a couple of years and then moving into university. So that's the level 4 and above, very sizable orange bars at the top, again split according to whether individuals are working or not. And then once they've exited higher education, many seem to be moving into employment, the grey shaded areas. So we can contrast this with the much more varied picture, particularly in terms of the earlier periods that we're seeing on the left-hand figure. So here we have still a reasonably sizable proportion of the population following that traditional academic route, but we've also got many more individuals going through vocational education routes, the kind of darker browns and lighter blues at the top, and similarly moving into employment once they've completed those qualifications. So what we can see on this figure is exactly the same types of diagrams, but here instead focusing those who are eligible for just 1 or 2 years of free school meals during their education careers, and then for almost the entirety of their education careers on the right hand side. So I'm not going to flick backwards and forwards so you can check it, but the figure for those eligible for just 1 or 2 years of free school meals, which is the kind of first group just inside our more disadvantaged group, is not a million miles away from the figure that I showed you for the kind of lowest of our quartiles based on the neighbourhood measures. There's not a dramatic difference between individuals just as you kind of cross over that boundary for being eligible for free school meals. On the right hand side though, you can see that there are some quite big differences compared to the left hand figure. So I guess the most noticeable of these is the fact that we have a really substantial proportion of the cohort who are on out of work benefits, the kind of white shading towards the bottom of the diagram, and a commensurately much lower proportion of the cohort who are in work. The pattern in terms of education is not quite so striking, certainly fewer going through the academic route from A-levels into university, but still a large number going through the vocational qualifications, but also quite a lot doing below level 2 qualifications in yellow. Now, of course, the challenge with those kind of figures is it's not necessarily showing us what any given individual is doing as they move through the education system and into the labour market. It's just saying, kind of in summary across this group, what are the activities that people are undertaking at different points in time. But what we want to move towards doing is summarising the actual trajectories that people are following. So classifying people according to that, what I described as the more traditional route of A-levels degree and into work, and differentiating that from the different patterns in terms of moving through vocational qualifications or the other routes we see. So what we're doing in order to kind of elicit this is some sequence and cluster analysis. So this is a kind of methodological approach to try and summarise the similarity of different pathways and group them together in a kind of way that makes it more tractable for analysis. So this is a kind of first pass attempt at that. This is all work in progress, so we're currently developing this methodology further, but this gives you a flavour of the types of things that we're doing. So this is classifying each of our socioeconomic groups according to the proportion that are in each of 7 clusters. And the 7 clusters we've kind of named according to our perception of what the routes look like. So you can see that we move kind of from no activity and benefits dependency for clusters 1 and 2. You can see that the benefits dependency, as was suggested by the previous figures I've showed you, is very strongly socially graded, and quite a large proportion of the population falling into that group when we're looking at the most disadvantaged. And then kind of towards the other end, you see clusters 6 and 7, which are that traditional route through the academic system, split according to whether someone is working whilst they're studying in green or not in dark blue. And again, you can see those are socially graded, but in the opposite direction, with those in the highest socioeconomic status group being the most likely to follow those routes, and actually even more strongly graded for those who are not working at the same time, as you might expect. So what we're ultimately going to end up doing with those clusters is to understand to what extent differences in pathways can help to explain these very large differences in earnings by socioeconomic background. So here we're using information taken at age 25 for this cohort, and it's showing you how much people are earning relative to those in our SES quartile 1, so the people who are just not eligible for free school meals at all during their school careers. And you can see that there are really substantial differences across the distribution for men on the left, women on the right. So in terms of the higher socioeconomic status individuals, for example, women are in that top group are really earning a lot more than those in SES quartile 1, men still earning more but a relatively smaller effect size. And then you can see in terms of the kind of penalty associated with being eligible for free school meals for a larger number of years, roughly similar between men and women, and approaching 20% by the time you get to being eligible for your entire school career. So really, really very significant differences in earnings across the socioeconomic distribution. And so what we'll be doing next is understanding the extent to which these different trajectories can help us explain these patterns. So just to wrap up, what I've showed you today hopefully gives you a flavour of some of the power of the LEO data that we've been able to use. It's demonstrated a very kind of strong monotonic relationship between years of free school meal eligibility and later outcomes. And that leads us to think that there's a kind of significant gap within the gap, as people have referred to it. So the idea that if you just look at the difference between free school meal eligibility and not, there's already a large difference. But actually, if you further differentiate those two groups, you see the scale of the differences increase as you're able to differentiate people more and more. So in terms of next steps, I've mentioned these as we've gone through, but we're going to be focusing more attention on the idea of whether eligibility for free school meals earlier versus later, for example, at different ages, whether that matters, or similarly, if you hold the number of periods constant, but you have them all grouped together at once, as opposed to moving in and out, does that matter in terms of trajectories and later wages? And then as I mentioned, the next part of what we're going to be doing is a mediation analysis, which is going to try and help us understand how much of these very large differences in wages we can explain using the kind of trajectories that we're creating. So hopefully that gives you a good sense of the data and some examples of the types of analysis that can be done with it. And now very happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.